for joining us for a closer look at chipmunks and squirrels with the Mass Audubon. It's hard to miss the fall frenzy and sometimes humorous antics of chipmunks and squirrels scurrying across forests and backyards in search of food for winter storage. We're going to take a closer look at their lives and learn about the different members of the Massachusetts squirrel family, including our newest resident, the black squirrel. We're going to discover the ecological roles that squirrels play in food webs and forest regeneration. And we'll look at these common critters with newfound appreciation. And this is all led by Patty Steinman, who's the education coordinator for Mass Audubon's Connecticut River Valley Sanctuaries, based out of Arcadia in East Hampton and Northampton. She has worked at Mass Audubon for over 30 years, developing and overseeing programs for adults, families, and children. And I again want to thank the Friends of the Library for sponsoring. So all nearly 150 of us who are watching live and the many more that will watch the recording, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Patty for joining us here today. And Patty, the floor is yours. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you everybody for coming. I think this is the first time we've had somebody from as far away as the United Kingdom. So thank you all. So we can't miss squirrels and chipmunks at this time of year. They are literally all over the place. So if we look at classification of squirrels, they're in the kingdom of animals, phylum Chordata, subphylum vertebrate. So just like us, the mammals, they have backbones. Their class is mammals. So they're like us so far until we get down to the order. And they are in the order rodents, and I'm sure you're familiar with many other rodents. And then they're in the family Squirridae, or the squirrel family. So moving on to rodents. So some of the other rodents that you might find in New England, the porcupine over on the left, the mouse. There's actually several species of mice that we have. So we have jumping mice, we have field mice, we have voles. Those are all in the mouse family, which are rodents that most of us, again, are very familiar with. The beaver is the largest of our rodents, and then the woodchuck is a rodent as well. The word rodent, the Latin name, refers to gnawing, so we can think of all of these animals as gnawing on wood. So famous squirrels and chipmunks. Actually, can you put in the chat if you can think of a famous chipmunk and a famous squirrel? And you might come up with different ones than me, but the ones that I'm thinking of are not actual real ones. So if you can just put it in the chat and see if anybody remembers some of these famous chipmunks and squirrels.
So we have Rocky, and we have a lot of Chip and Dale, and Alvin, Simon, and Theodore.
That's exactly who I had. So there's Alvin the chipmunk and Rocky the squirrel. And if anybody, when I'm sure there's a lot of people younger than me out there who may not remember these cartoon squirrels and chipmunks. Although I guess Alvin still sings around the holidays, Alvin and the Chipmunks. So looking at the family of squirrels rather, which the chipmunk is actually part of, worldwide, there's 280 different species, 66 in North America. The Latin name squirrus refers to shadow tail. So most members of this family have a long tail, which seems to shadow them. You may hear the term ground squirrel, and we actually don't have any, in New England, we don't have any actual ground squirrels that are in that the true ground squirrel family. Those would be marmots and prairie dogs. I heard Robert say somebody was from Utah. So if you're out in the Four Corners area or out west, you would probably see more of those prairie dogs and marmots, those true ground squirrels. Our chipmunk is more found on the ground. It can climb trees, but it's more on the ground, but it's not a true ground squirrel. We also have trees. Most of ours are tree squirrels, so arboreal, meaning they live most of their life in the tree. They're certainly scurrying and down on the ground, but they're often up in trees. I shouldn't say all of their life, because most of the time in the wintertime, they have underground dens, but they're considered a tree squirrel. And then we have flying squirrels. And in Massachusetts and New England, we have two species of flying squirrels. And they actually don't fly, but we'll get to those in a little bit. Squirrels are found on every continent except Antarctica and Australia. The largest is 3 feet long, found in India, the giant squirrel. The smallest, there's a few species, so just about 4.7 to 5.5 inches, the African pygmy, as well as the least pygmy squirrel. And neither of them are found in our area. So as I mentioned, being a member of the rodent family, their front teeth never stop growing. So that's why they constantly have to be gnawing at different materials. They have an excellent sense of sight. They can actually, their eyes are located on the side, and necessary, a lot of animals that are predators have their eyes on the side, which, just like the squirrels, allows them to see greater distances. They can see up, they can see down, they can really see almost 360 degrees with their eyes on the side. The squirrels also have, their eyes are bulging out a little bit, which gives them a little bit extra distance vision. So excellent vision, peripheral vision, really all around, since they are always either up on trees or scurrying down on the ground, and there's a lot of predators that are certainly after them. It's said that they can see they can process visual information about 2 times as fast as humans, and that they can recognize other squirrels 50 feet away. They can also recognize, not that we should be feeding squirrels, but people who have put out food for squirrels say that they certainly can recognize people, different people, which I certainly don't doubt at all. You may hear the term dray, which is an English word meaning nest. So squirrels have, or the red squirrel and the gray squirrel, I should say, have 2 types of nests. So they do have nests in the trees, like the one that we can see on the left picture over there. And that's not actually where they do raise their young. They raise their young in underground dens. However, if it gets too warm, they will bring them up into the nest tree, and they'll also use the nest tree after the young are born during the summer months basically as a home. And so that's their cavity nest. So now we're going to look at the squirrel family in Massachusetts. So we have the eastern gray squirrel, which is the one that we're most familiar with and is the most common of all squirrels. We have the red squirrel, and we'll look a little bit more in detail about that in just a few minutes. The red squirrel is a little bit smaller and a lot more aggressive than the gray squirrel. And then we have the northern flying squirrel and the southern flying squirrel. Both of these are the northern flying squirrel, actually, I shouldn't say, is as common. It hasn't been documented in Massachusetts for several decades. It still certainly could be out there. The southern flying squirrel is found in Massachusetts in large numbers, probably almost as many as the gray squirrel, but we just never see them because they are nocturnal. And then there's the black squirrel, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we have the eastern chipmunk and the woodchuck. So they're considered in the squirrel family. We'll talk about the chipmunk today, but we're not going to be talking about the woodchuck. So the squirrels have 5 toes in the front, although one of them is very thumb-like, and they also have 5 toes in the back. And then they have knobs on the pads, which are used for gripping. So they have these very strong, sturdy pads, which they need to have since they're constantly jumping and making sometimes a rough landing. So that really does protect their feet. Those knobs help them for gripping. They have long, muscular hind feet, which they use to basically to be climbing on trees. They can actually, the red squirrel and the gray squirrel can turn their feet, like their back feet, 180 degrees. So basically it can face any direction, which is an important adaptation when you're constantly climbing on trees and running away from things or running towards things. They can leap 10 times their body length, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen that. They often will zigzag, which is their way of getting away from predators. And they can run up to 20 miles per hour. So very quick, very agile for living a life up in trees. So this is what if you were to see squirrel prints in the snow, this is what their prints would look like. So the 2 in the front that you can see, let me just see if I can grab a highlighter over here. Okay, so these up in the front over here, these are actually the rear legs, the back legs, and then
So,
these
Patty,
2
can I
over
interrupt
here.
you for a second?
Sure.
So I think your slideshow has frozen for us a bit. Can you maybe stop your share and then share again, and maybe we can get things moving? But we're currently
Sure. Did
on,
it?
yeah, we're on the
Oh, did
screen.
it just?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was wonder if it was when I did the laser pointer, whether that did it.
It's possible. I think the slides stopped advancing about 60 seconds ago or so.
Okay, so I'm going to stop and start again.
That sounds good.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, maybe more like 90 seconds ago. Sorry.
All right. Let's see.
You're keeping me on my toes, Patty. I was responding to an email from my director. Sorry about that.
Ah. Okay. So what can you see now, Robert?
So right now we see like paw prints, I'm assuming, footprints.
That's it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay. And okay, so the paw prints, and I'm not going to do the laser pointer because I'm not sure if that did it or not. But the big ones in the front, those are actually the rear paws, and then the 2 little ones, those are the front. So and actually you can tell the difference between a squirrel's and a rabbit's. You might be thinking these look just like rabbit prints, but the 2 in the front in a squirrel, those are pretty symmetrical. Where if this were a rabbit, they would be, the 2 little ones in the front would be asymmetrical. But this is what the paw prints look like in the snow. They also, the front and the rear in deep snow can blend together, so it can almost look like deer hooves. I was once leading a group of adults and looking at some of these prints that I thought were deer, and we were following it. And I told the group that I thought it was deer prints until it went to the base of a tree and went up. And somebody was very, very kind and said to me, I don't think they're deer prints. They went up the tree. So again, it can be confusing. They can look like hooves.
Patty, could you actually go backwards? I think there were a few slides that we missed. This was before the
Sure.
laser pointer attempt. And
Okay.
so keep going. Well, it's okay. Okay. Yeah. So I think this was maybe this was the one. Keep going back even further. I just want to see how many slides we missed. I'm
Okay.
sorry. All right. I think okay. Go forward
Okay.
and forward again. All right. So I think this was the slide that we froze up on. So we didn't get to see the
Okay.
squirrel families, but you did list them. So
Okay.
you didn't have images of each squirrel. So folks, you didn't miss many images. Okay. All right. Keep going, Patty.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Robert. So here's the members. Since you heard it, I should test you. Here's the members of the family. And just let me know if I freeze again, Robert.
I'm gonna
And
pay very close
here's,
attention. Okay.
okay. And here's the toes in the front and in the back. We were saying again with those nods for really gripping things. And here we talked a little bit about how the back feet can actually, the ankles can twist 180 degrees, and so that they can actually go forward and backward so that they can jump down trees and escape pretty quickly, that they often will zigzag when trying to escape from predators, that they can leap 10 times their body length. And then I think you saw this one, we were just talking a little bit about how the front and the back can, in deep snow, blend together, so it almost looks like hooves. In just a little bit of light snow, it's a lot easier to see the two back feet, which are the ones in the foreground of this picture, the larger ones, and then the smaller ones in the front. And then I think we just ended with, what do they do in the fall? And they pretty much go nuts. So those of you who are in New England are probably seeing in their yards and in their walks, wherever you are outside, that this is a bumper year for acorns. So we have, and we'll get into the next slide in just a second, talking about the word mast crop, mast, which is basically, well, let me just go to the next slide over here, which is edible food of woody plants. And we have what's called soft mast and hard mast. So soft mast, we have throughout the warmer months, we have berries. Some of them, such as this picture over here, this is a viburnum called a high bush cranberry. And this is good food for squirrels, for birds, for all sorts of animals in the summer months. There, excuse me, there are some berries that do persist in the wintertime, one that looks a little bit like this, a winterberry, which is from a small shrub of the holly family. But most of the soft mast disappears in the winter, and we're left with the hard mast, which is all the nuts that we find, acorns, hickory nuts, walnuts, chestnuts. All of that is what's called hard mast, which provides food for not only squirrels, but for wild turkeys, for birds, for deer, for porcupines, for all sorts of animals in the forest. And the squirrels are certainly going after that. So in the deciduous forest in New England, the oak trees are our dominant species. And we have two families of oaks. So we have the red oaks and we have the white oaks. So those are families, meaning that there's several species in the red oak group. So you may have heard of scarlet oak, red oak, The white oak, you might have heard of chestnut white oak, swamp white oak, as well as white oak. The red oaks, if you look at the leaf, you can see points at the top of each lobe, so it's very pointy on the leaf. That's a way to tell the members of the red oak family, where the white oak, you can see that the leaves are very smooth. So all of these oaks provide much of 95% of the diet of the squirrels in the wintertime. And there's a difference between the acorns as well. So the red oaks have more fat and more tannins in them, or compounds which are bitter tasting to us. And those tannins are basically try to deter some of the browsers from eating the acorns or whatever fruit has the tannins. But some of them certainly do get eaten. And the white oak has less fat and less tannins. The white oaks, when the acorns fall to the ground, they begin to germinate right away. And the squirrels are definitely going after those. The red oaks will tend to germinate after the winter, so in the springtime. And sometimes you'll see some of them where the squirrels have started to eat them. They've eaten just part of them, and then they won't eat all of them because of those tannins, because it's pretty bitter. And that's actually advantageous to these red oaks because the embryo is usually on the far end where the squirrel hasn't eaten it. So hopefully those red oaks will continue to grow despite the squirrel starting to nibble at some of them. Well, and there's all of our squirrels going after those oaks. Here we have a few of my former campers who not only do squirrels and chipmunks collect the acorns, but certainly people do as well. And you can see most of the acorns. If you went outside after this program, I would challenge you to go pick up an acorn and look closely. If the cap is gone, there's probably a good chance that a squirrel or a chipmunk has already started to nibble at it. So once they fall, again, they really do start to get consumed by those squirrels and chipmunks, a real important source of food. Included in the hard mast are also pine cones and spruce cones. So these are from pine trees over here. So these are all the scales. And I'm not going to try putting my cursor on, but you can see some of the scales that were cleaned off on the left. And each one of those has two little pine seeds in it. So if you go to the store and you get pine nuts, usually those are pinyon, so they're not from our area, but each of those pine nuts was found originally on the scale of a pine tree, or a pine cone, I should say. So there's lots and lots of scales, that's lots and lots of seeds, 2 seeds per scale, and I'm going to venture to say maybe about 150 scales per cone. So in other words, a lot of seeds for those squirrels. So we're going to go through the members of the squirrel family now. And most of us in the eastern part of the state are familiar with, our gray squirrel, which again is the most common of all the squirrels. The gray squirrel is about 17 to 18 inches in length. It has a big fluffy tail, gray on the back, kind of whitish on the belly and the chin. Each individual a little bit different colored, but generally you can see some of that kind of whitish on the belly and definitely that grayish, sometimes grayer, sometimes a little bit blacker color as well. They were introduced into city parks in 1847 when it was thought that our city parks needed more wildlife. And needless to say, they have done just fine. They're extremely adapted to urban areas. As I mentioned earlier, they can run 10 to 20 miles per hour, which translates to about 25 feet per second, which translates to very, very fast. They are diurnal or active in the day, as well as crepuscular, active morning and evening. They are arboreal or living a lot in their trees, although we certainly do see them on the ground. In Massachusetts, they're found certainly all over New England, most of New England, except northern Maine. And I wouldn't doubt it if, with climate change, if they do continue to extend their range further north. They prefer deciduous forests, so any forest where they can get those acorns, as well as other nuts, hickory nuts, etc. And certainly they do well in city parks, city forests, etc. We mentioned the food that they eat, mostly nuts. They will eat berries as well. They'll also eat birds' eggs. They'll also eat the winter moth is an invasive moth. It's been around for about 10 years, mostly in the eastern part of Massachusetts. So the gray squirrel is beneficial, and then it will eat the pupa of the winter moth. Will also eat fruits as well as mushroom. Lifespan is about 6 years, and they have usually 2 litters per year, one in the early spring and one in early fall. And the ones that are born in the early spring, the young will stay with the adults until the second batch is born. And many of us, I'm sure, have seen some of the young squirrels just playing around, almost like cats and dogs, just running around, certainly learning squirrel life skills. John James Audubon wanted the Latin name of the gray squirrel to translate to migrating, because throughout history, there's been times when there's been huge migrations of gray squirrels. We talked about the acorns, and we talked about that this year there's been what's called a mast crop, or a bumper crop. There's just a lot of acorns. So every 2 to 5 years, seed nut producing trees will have bumper crop years of bumper crops. And in some years, the red oaks and the white oaks will have the bumper crop the same year, which is, I think, what's going to be happening this year. So there's a lot of acorns out there. Some years they don't have bumper crops, and there's very few acorns or nuts out there. And in those years, the squirrels will either starve or they'll need to migrate to places where they can find food. And there's throughout history, again, there's been these documented events of gray squirrels migrating across rivers, great distances, in order to find food. So close to home here in Connecticut, the Connecticut River, it was actually in Connecticut, not in Massachusetts, but the Connecticut River in the 19th century, there was documentation of 1 million squirrels crossing, I'm sorry, 1 million squirrels about 1 mile wide that was crossing the Connecticut River because there wasn't food on the western part. And people said that they actually saw some of them floating on logs to get across. In Wisconsin, in the 1800s, for 4 weeks, people witnessed what was estimated as 500,000 squirrels migrating. And the same was documented in New York in the late 1800s. So again, they can, I don't like to use the word migrate, because migrate usually goes from one place to the other and then they return. When they would go this distance, they would stay, so they wouldn't return. The gray squirrel is thought to be a scatter hoarder. What that means is that it collects and it buries one nut at a time. So it will collect them and then it will bury them in the ground to be able to come back for in the wintertime or later on, even in the fall, or in the summer to consume its fine. So if it has a bunch of nuts, it sees them, it will collect them, it will gather them, it will collect them, and then it will bury them one at a time. However, 25% of what it buries is thought to be stolen by other gray squirrels. Some of the squirrels will actually, they'll dig holes and they'll actually pretend to bury the nuts. Sometimes the ones that they actually bury, they will cover with debris. And the ones that they're pretending to bury, they'll also pretend to be covering them as well. It's thought that gray squirrels will recover, of the ones that weren't stolen, they'll recover 85% of the ones that are stored. They can smell up to a foot in the snow in order to find those. And then the ones that aren't recovered by the squirrels or stolen by others might be consumed by other animals or grow into oak trees. And having oak trees around is great. Oak trees provide all sorts of food for other critters, as we were talking about. There's a word called a midden, which is basically the debris of from these nuts and the plant debris that the squirrel leaves behind. A gray squirrel will just leave its debris kind of scattered all over the place. And the red squirrel we'll get to in a minute, but they have huge middens. So evidence of the gray squirrel feeding is just all of these. It looks like these are hickory nuts up on the upper part of the slide over here. But you'll see all of these husks. The gray squirrel will cut acorns in wide strips. They'll eat hickory nuts as well. And you can see the big thick nuts of the hickory trees. And then we have the black squirrel. So the black squirrel is not a species of its own. It's genetically the same as the gray squirrel, but it's what's called melanistic. So it's extra pigmentation. It's the exact opposite of albinoism, which is lack of pigmentation. We do have gray squirrels, which are albinos, and we also have what's called leucistic. So albino has just like people have the pink eyes, and the fur of the albino squirrels would be all white. Leucistic would be some white and would have some gray, and they would not have pink eyes. So, but this one, again, melanistic or black squirrels. So black squirrels are not native to New England, although there are pockets of gray squirrel populations, especially in northern New England. There's small pockets which have developed on their own. But in Massachusetts, much of the black squirrels that you're going to see came from the town or the city of Westfield, Massachusetts. So Westfield is just not too far west of the Connecticut River, and there's a park called Stanley Park. And in 1948, there was a conference that was held at the Beveridge Foundation. So the first director of Stanley Park's name was Frank Stanley Beveridge, and he came from Michigan, and the black squirrels are actually native there. And some of his friends brought over in 1948 two black squirrels, and they didn't make it that first year. The next year, they brought over 6 more, and they did survive. They were released in Stanley Park, and since then, there's a huge black squirrel population in that part of the state. So in different parts of Massachusetts, again, you're going to see a lot of these black squirrels. So Westfield, probably the largest, in parts of Amherst. There's populations, I know, in Concord, New Hampshire. So many of them, again, developed from these first ones that were brought to Stanley Park, although that's not the only way that they got here. Some of these kind of genetic mutations can develop on their own. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the red squirrel. And this is the aggressive member of the squirrel family. The red squirrel is smaller than the gray squirrel. It's about 17 to 18 inches. It does have a fluffy tail. It is also diurnal and crepuscular, just like we were talking about with the gray squirrel. The red squirrel is found more in evergreen forests. So you'll find it in southern New England, in a lot of pine forests, if you live in northern New England, in spruce fir forests. Also, it can be found in deciduous forests or mixed deciduous forests, but definitely a cone eater, certainly acorns as well, but it likes its cones. Other food that the red squirrel likes is it can be predatory. It can eat birds' eggs. It can also eat small mammals. And it will eat mushrooms, and it will actually take mushrooms and it will store them in the crooks of trees. So if you're ever walking in the woods and you see some mushrooms sitting in the crook or the cavity of a tree, this could be because a gray squirrel is storing it there to let the moisture evaporate, and then it will bring it into its den for the winter. The gray squirrels and the red squirrels, they're active in the winter. So you're definitely going to see them around, although they do take some food, a lot of food, and they will store it in their dens in the winter time. I mentioned mushrooms. They also will take Amanita mushrooms, which some members of the Amanita family, are very poisonous. And some of these red squirrels have been seen consuming them. So probably not poisonous to the squirrels. They, as well as the red squirrels, will take sap from both sugar maples as well as black birch. Black birch next to sugar maple has the highest sugar content. So they'll bite some of the twigs in the springtime of these trees so that the sap comes out. And it's thought that the red squirrel has quite the sweet tooth, and it will actually let some of the sap freeze. So it's almost like having a little maple popsicle, but it's letting some of that water evaporate out so that there's a less water and more sugar content. The red squirrel can often be seen on rocks on high areas, kind of scurrying around, getting its food. Here's our red squirrel over here. They're very, very noisy. They're constantly scolding intruders. As I mentioned, extremely aggressive, extremely territorial. I've heard reports of hunters being very upset when a red squirrel is around, because if they're trying to be pretty secretive and in a blind, the red squirrels are giving them away. The red squirrels will actually turn on their mate after mating. They won't tolerate other red squirrels. I once took a group of kids, campers from one of our day camps, and we took them for an overnight, and we had all of the kids. We had them sitting in a circle. We were going over how to set up their tents. Everybody was quiet and listening. And all of a sudden, somebody got hit on their leg with an acorn, and then another person did. And we looked up, and there was a red squirrel, and it was extremely territorial, wanted us out of its territory. It kept throwing these acorns, and the kids were going crazy. We moved. We did not have the tents in that area. And that squirrel, I think, was a little bit happier, but extremely territorial. Not very social, like some of the other squirrels, does not stay around with its mate at all. They do live in underground dens and again in tree cavities. So in the fall, you can look for cones that have been cut by the squirrels. They bury them in big piles. I think the next slide is going to show that. Yes, here we go. So this slide on the left over there, that's a big pile. It looks like these are spruce cones, a big, what's called again, a midden, which is a big pile of debris, plant debris that's left behind. So these squirrels will well, we talked about the red squirrel the gray squirrel being a scatter hoarder. The red squirrel is a larder hoarder. So it stores its nuts in one big area. And it will actually store some of the green cones, it will put in the middle of this midden pile. And that way it will preserve them so that it can come back and get that food. And again, it has a really good sense of smell to be able to get that. So here's some spruce cones that have been stripped by a red squirrel. So we're going to move on to the eastern chipmunk. Whoops. Sorry about that. I don't know how that chipmunk got in there. There we go. Here's our chipmunk right over here. And I think that people are very familiar with the chipmunk. So the smallest member of the squirrel family. So has that tawny coloration. There's 19 different species of chipmunks that live in North America. One, the eastern chipmunk in our area. They do have the stripes and that tawny coloration, and they actually resemble deer in their coloration, and for the same purpose, certainly for camouflage. Their Latin name translates to food storer. So they store food in their dens. The chipmunk is all about collecting food, frenzied collection of food, and then storing it in its den. And its den, it's underground, and that is basically a huge part of the chipmunk's life. They carry their food in their cheek pouches. They are active during the daytime or diurnal. They can be found in both deciduous and conifer forests, so their range overlaps both the red as well as the gray squirrel. They also like rocky areas. They are certainly found throughout Massachusetts. They're often found, if you're in an area where there's stone walls, look for chipmunks and evidence of chipmunks. They love to live there. They're a tiny or a pretty small animal, so they like to be in elevated areas. So you can find them again on stone walls, on rocks, just kind of getting a little bit of height in order to have a little bit more protection. And a lot you'll see their midden piles or their debris on these elevated areas. Unlike the gray squirrel and the red squirrel, in the wintertime, they're what's called a sleeper or a torpor state. So they're not a true hibernator. A true hibernator's metabolism, heartbeat, everything goes way down. In a true hibernator, the only true hibernating mammals that we have in Massachusetts are a woodchuck, a little brown bat, and the meadow jumping mouse. But a chipmunk is, again, it goes into a torpor state. Its metabolism slows down some, but not as much as those true hibernators. And on warm days, it's out looking around for food. They do take in the fall, now's the time you see them, and they take they're basically, again, scurrying around, getting as much nuts as they can, and they bring that into their den. they can actually get more than 1 year's worth of food supply in their den, and they carry it in their cheap pouches. So we'll get to that in just a second. They live a solitary life, and their underground den can get it. Basically, it goes down, it's a circle. I'll show you the picture of that in just a minute. And it goes down about 7 inches, and then it spreads horizontally and can get to 30 feet. And there's all sorts of chambers down there. So it's their entire home, which is underground, that we're not certainly able to see. We just see kind of the little entrance holes. Sometimes we see them, sometimes we don't, because they're very secretive and they'll hide them. And they'll also cover them up at times. They'll cover up one of their holes, and then they'll create a new one if they feel that there's a predator watching and knowing where their hole is. They're extremely vocal. They have chips and chuckles and all sorts of sounds. Each of their sounds means something. They have their high-pitched chips, which generally mean that there's a ground predator. And then they have their deeper chip, which means that there's an aerial predator. So each of those things definitely means something. And then they'll begin to kind of go into that sleep later in the fall. So here we see the chipmunk hole. So it's just about 1 to 1.5 inches in diameter. And they're pretty neat inside of their den. So they'll take any soil that falls in, and you can see them sometimes popping up from the hole, spreading some of the dirt around. So they don't want any inside. And as I mentioned, if they feel that there's a predator watching, they will cover up this hole and they'll create another one. So here they are, kind of scurrying around. So these cheek pouches are pretty amazing. They can expand to the size of their body. They can stretch them to 3 times the size of their head. And this is all for their food storage. So a researcher found, not all at the same time, but one chipmunk that had 31 kernels of corn in its pouch, another one with 13 prune pits. Not sure where it picked up those prune pits, had to have been somewhere near humans. 70 sunflower seeds, 32 beech nuts, and 6 acorns. So pretty efficient at storing those. So again, here's that stump where you'll often find them, and you'll find that midden right on the stump over there. Here's some more little middens from chipmunks. Okay, so when I reshared my slides, I did not put on my sound. So I'm going to just go over this, and then I'll try to play this. And Robert, if you can let me know when I do, but my guess is that the sound is not going to come out. So once I finish the slideshow, which is just a few more slides, I can go back and then
sounds good. Yeah, I don't think it's going to play, but yeah.
Okay. So just kind of at this time, if you go outside, and this is the time to really be listening, and you can actually distinguish between the chipmunk, the red squirrel, and the gray squirrel. They may all kind of sound almost scoldy and clucky, but if you listen closely, and you'll be able to kind of sometimes hear the differences. So chipmunks, there's these chips, there's these clucks. And again, each one has its meaning. We may not know all of them, but they do. But you can at least listen and realize that there's different sounds out there. So if you hear really high-pitched chips, and this is in most things, even birds, and I should say the other squirrels as well, when it's something which is really, really high-pitched, it's generally something which is indicating that there's a predator or danger. So with the chipmunks, high pitch chips. So just kind of like a brief chip is usually ground predators, which is different than a deeper sound is advertising aerial predators. And then there's also a long trill. So then there's like little rapid chips when disturbed. So those are all different sounds that you might be hearing. Red squirrels, it often sounds like it's very much scolding. And if you can see them, I should have said also, I don't think I did mention, members of this family really communicate with their tails. So if you're outside and you see a squirrel and you're able to just watch the tail, and I can't tell you what it means, but I can tell you that they're communicating with the tail. Territorial harsh rattling of the red squirrel. And I'm sure many of you have heard kind of like the whining. Kind of a lot of times I know I hear sounds in the forest, and a lot we think thinking it might be birds, and it turns into the squealing and the kind of chirring of a red squirrel. And then there's the gray squirrel, which kind of has these harsh harsh squeaks, etc. So let me try this. And again, I think it may not play, but I can hopefully come back to it. So
Eastern chipmunk.
can you hear that, Robert?
Yes.
Oh, good. That's that cluck. Those are those short bursts.
Red squirrel.
That's that sure territorial chatter.
Eastern gray squirrel. Flying squirrel.
Okay. I hope that some of you have heard some of those squirrel and chipmunk sounds. So we're going to move briefly to our flying squirrels, and they are, I think, beautiful, beautiful animals. So they have those big dark eyes, unlike the red squirrel, the gray squirrel, the chipmunk. They are nocturnal. And as I mentioned at the beginning, There's two species. We'll see those in just a second. So there's a northern flying squirrel and the southern flying squirrel. The northern is a little bit larger and much less common, but the southern flying squirrel, very common. We just don't see them. Probably the best way to see them would be if you have a bird feeder, and if you have either a wildlife camera, you might be able to record them. Sometimes you may notice if you have bird feeders and if you keep them out at night in the winter time that the or in the fall, if you keep them out at night, you may realize that a lot of the food has disappeared. And that would probably, the culprit would probably be the flying squirrel. They do visit bird feeders at night. And again, most of us don't know. But if you have a wildlife camera, or if you know that you have one, if you go out and you shine a flashlight, you might be able to see the flying squirrel. So they are much more social than the gray and the red squirrel. Just like the others, they like to eat acorns, other nuts. They can be found both in conifer and deciduous forests. They too will eat mushrooms, bird eggs. They live in hollow trees. And they are active throughout the year except for the extreme cold. And one of the things that they'll do to protect them or to keep warm is to huddle with other squirrels at night. So they're kind of like a grayish color with white. This is the southern flying squirrel. The northern flying squirrel, as I mentioned, is a little bit larger, and it has a little bit more gray underneath on its belly. They both do require tree cavities to survive. So this is what they look like when they're gliding. They do not fly. The only flying mammal are bats, but they do have this flap of skin, which is called a patagia. So that flap of skin extends on either side from the wrists to the inside of the legs. They'll spread it out, and then they'll push off with their strong back legs, and their tail is used in many ways. Their tail is used as a rudder. Their tail is used almost as a parachute, as a stabilizer, and also as a brake. And they can glide nearly 30 feet. So there is our flying squirrel over there. Okay. And just to end with talking about squirrels, so they are considered to be a keystone species in many areas. So a species that if we didn't have them, it would basically have a big effect on our environment. They are responsible for planting many, many trees, which will then serve for food for many critters, as well as providing us with carbon and being a part of our healthy forests, or certainly creating biodiversity. In some places, squirrels have a symbiotic relationship with truffles, which are a well sought after mushroom. So the squirrels will, especially flying squirrels, will eat the truffles, and then the spores or the seeds of the truffle mushroom would come through the other end uninjured, and then they will grow, and again helps to provide for a healthy forest. The squirrels, especially the gray squirrel, is the prey to many. Things to do to help with squirrel populations. The squirrels, most of them we talked about, live in tree cavities. So if you have dead trees in your yard or even live ones that have cavities, remember it's home to many squirrels as well as other wildlife. We talked about acorns, not needing to rake all of them, keeping some of them on the ground, keeping leaves on the ground. So that's all helps to provide food cover for squirrels as well as other wildlife. And some folks I know, squirrels can certainly be a nuisance if they get into your homes or if they're in your yards. One of the best things to do is to feed birds only in the winter time if you do have a squirrel problem, and if you have a bear problem, of course. Keeping squirrels, they can be a nuisance if they get in the house, so sealing off openings, etc. And there's also lots of information on certainly Mass Audubon's website, as well as I'm sure your whatever city, town that you're in, I'm sure you can get, if you do have nuisance squirrels, if you get on your state wildlife website, there's usually good guidelines on how to prevent squirrels. There's places that actually, I believe it was Asheville, North Carolina, aside from hurricanes, they came up with the first National Squirrel Day several years ago in appreciation of squirrels. So with that, I apologize. I think I'm running a little bit late. So that is it with my slides. So I am going to stop sharing. And if anybody has any questions, I will be glad to try to answer them.
Well, Patty, you ended right on time because I babbled for the first 5 minutes and then we had
Oh,
some
good.
technical difficulties. So you did great. So folks,
Oh, good.
let's take about 10 minutes of audience questions and comments if folks want to stick around. If you need to dip, you will receive the recording tomorrow via email. I'm going to ask the questions in the order they appear in the Q&A. Eileen asks, is chocolate safe for squirrels? I have leftover protein bars with some chocolate chips in them.
I have no idea, Eileen, but I would probably say probably not. I know it's not good, certainly for dogs, for cats. So I would not encourage you to do that.
Louise asks, how do I discourage squirrels from eating dogwood buds?
Okay, that's an interesting question because dogwood, dogwoods are toxic to certainly to humans. There's lots of parts of the dogwood. So yeah, I really don't think, I mean, you can certainly put like hot pepper on bulbs to try to discourage squirrels and chipmunks. I think it would be hard. I mean, if this dogwood is low enough, you could certainly try that. Any type of hot pepper often works. But I think it might be difficult on a dogwood, possibly put some fencing around. Well, that would be hard for a squirrel. If you're able to put some netting, maybe that would work.
Pilar asks, I've seen the tree nests, but what do ground nests look like?
It's a den, so it would be a den that we really couldn't see unless we had a camera to look underneath there. And again, that would be for the gray squirrels. The chipmunks, their den would be much larger in size, really spreading out much more chambers in a chipmunk den.
An anonymous attendee asks, what are the chipmunks doing when they keep digging in potted plants? It doesn't look like they are burying anything and there isn't any nuts in the plants. The soil ends up all over the place and it's quite damaging to the plants and its roots. So what are chipmunks doing digging through potted plants?
Okay, so there might be something that smells good to them. My guess is that there's some sort of scent that they're going after.
Pilar asks, how much food do squirrels generally eat daily?
Okay, good question. I couldn't tell you exactly how much. And it also would be seasonal. So in the fall, just like most other mammals, they're trying to put on a good fat layer. So they're going to be eating an awful lot in the fall. In the winter, probably as much as they can get, kind of keeping that as well. And even in the summer, but I couldn't tell you the exact amount, but I would say as much as they're able. Oops, did I freeze or did you freeze, Robert?
So Patty, either I froze or you froze.
That's
Sorry
what I
about that.
just thought. Yes, yeah.
So Elisa is asking, this is a vocab question and a spelling question. Lisa would not like to know, what is the word for the squirrel feeding debris, and can you spell it? I think you
Sure,
might
it's
have mentioned a word.
called a midden, midden.
Midden. Great. Let's see here. I'm going to jump to the chat real quick. We have questions in both places. I'll try to get to as many as possible. We'll take a few more minutes. Catherine wants to know, do chipmunks and squirrels communicate verbally to each other like birds do?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a lot of those sounds that we're hearing.
Patricia wants to know, who are the predators for chipmunks and squirrels?
Just about anything that's out there that's larger. So hawks and owls, foxes, coyotes, fisher, weasels, just about anything again that's larger. Snakes.
When we're talking about the size of a squirrel, Marriott wants to know, do we include its tail? Is the tail part of the measurement?
No, no, it's not. Nope. The tail is almost, if not as large as the body. So about 18, 20 inches for a gray squirrel.
Good question from Joan. If they have such good vision and speed, why can't they safely cross the road?
Excellent question. I guess in evolutionary wise, cars were not around, nor were highways. The red squirrel is the most intelligent, and you do tend to find more gray squirrels hit by cars, but then again, the red squirrel's habitat, usually conifer forests, are further than road that from a road than a deciduous forest.
Just to follow up on a question I asked a few questions ago, we understand that squirrels can communicate with other squirrels and chipmunks can communicate with other chipmunks, but is there any cross communication? Can chipmunks communicate with squirrels and vice versa?
I'm sure that there is. I mean, when they're doing scolding, I'm sure that they understand what that means. So I'm sure that they definitely are, especially the red squirrel is just so much of a scolder. I'm sure those others
I may have
understand
frozen
it.
again.
I don't know, folks, if you can hear me. Oh, you're unfrozen.
All right, I'm sorry, folks. I think we're going to wind it down. We're having some massive internet issues at work, so I'm actually Zooming from home, and we made it to the 70-minute mark, but here comes, now we're having some connectivity issues. So I think we'll start to wind it down. Patty, do you have any last words for the audience before we wrap it up?
I would just say it's fall, it's beautiful. Get outside, and they're all over the place. So it's an amazing animal to learn about just by watching and listening, watching those tails. And thank you everybody for coming.
So folks, let's give Patty one last big virtual round of applause for a great presentation. Look for an email from me tomorrow with a link to the recording, as well as information about some other upcoming Mass Audubon programs. When you exit, for those watching live, when you exit the Zoom, please make sure to take the feedback survey. And I do apologize for the technical difficulties. But thank you all so much. I hope to see many of you soon. And Patty, wonderful job as always.
Thank you. Thank you everybody for coming. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.